He opened the door with a gun in his hand, expecting danger in the dark, but instead found a starving German shepherd who collapsed into a dramatic death scene just to beg for mercy. Ethan Cole was a broken Navy SEAL who believed his purpose had died long ago. Ghost was a dog with a hidden history and a mission stitched into his very collar, a mission to heal a wounded soldier's soul. But when a brutal blizzard swallowed the Montana mountains and the world turned white, Ghost didn't stay by the fire. He sprinted into the deadly storm to protect a fragile heartbeat no one else could hear. What Ethan discovered in the snow that night will shatter you, and then rebuild you piece by piece. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no human or animal should be abandoned in the cold, hit subscribe, because this story might just renew your faith in miracles. The blizzard crushed the valley beneath a ceiling of white silence. Snow fell so heavily it blurred the lines between sky and earth, swallowing the forest in a breathless quiet that felt older than time. Inside a lone wooden cabin crouched beside the Montana tree line, Ethan Cole sat hunched at a small kitchen table, shoulders angled like a man who had long forgotten how to stand without carrying weight. At 58, Ethan carried the rugged look of a veteran shaped by war and winter. Broad-shouldered, square-jawed, with a salt and iron beard that framed a face lined by grief more than age. His hair, once black, had turned the color of storm clouds. His eyes, sharp and cold blue, carried the restless vigilance of someone who no longer believed in peace. For years he had lived alone in this cabin, a man carved from routine and regret. His late wife, Alexei, a tall, slender woman of Russian descent, had been the only person who could soften him. She had copper-brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, pale, freckled skin, and eyes the gray shade of meltwater streams. Gentle in gestures, she had the slow, careful way of speaking of someone who grew up surviving more winters than summers. Losing her had gutted him. The second hole in his chest came later, his last mission as a Navy SEAL handler, when he ordered his K-9 partner forward too soon. The explosion had taken the dog instantly. Ethan never forgave himself, and the guilt hardened inside him like a stone. Since then, he lived as though still deployed. Same wake-up hour, same military precision, same emotional armor, discipline, routine, silence. That was all that kept him functioning. But tonight the storm altered the air around him. A metallic echo rang from the back of the cabin, sharp enough to slice through the white noise of the blizzard. Ethan lifted his head, breath pausing in his throat. The sound had come from the storage shed, a place he hadn't opened since the day he sealed away the last things that still smelled like Alexei. Tools, spare gear, the broken collar of the dog he had lost, all locked away because he could not bear to see them. Another metallic clatter, this one louder, rounder, as if something heavy had toppled. Instinct surged. Ethan rose from his chair with the fluidity of a trained operator, his movements controlled despite the stiffness in his joints. He grabbed his SIG P226 from the drawer and the black tactical flashlight that had accompanied him through 2 tours. Even after so many years of isolation, he still checked the weapon the same way. Magazine, slide, chamber, safety. Every motion crisp and calm. The blizzard battered him the moment he stepped outside. Wind shredded through his coat, flinging icy needles across his cheeks. He lowered his head, boots crunching through thick snow as he moved toward the shed. A squat wooden structure pressed against the shadows of the tree line. The padlock hung crooked. Not broken. Not forced. Just nudged open, like someone, or something, had fumbled with it. Ethan's pulse shifted into a steady, tactical rhythm. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, light slicing through the darkness. "Show yourself," he commanded, voice gravelly, controlled. No answer, only shuffling. Then a thump. He advanced, clearing corners the way years of training taught him. And that's when he saw it. Curling over a heavy plastic storage bin, ribs jutting against thin fur, was a German shepherd. Not quite adult, maybe 2 years old, its coat matted with ice and burrs, one ear slightly folded backward as if permanently bent. Its eyes, deep ember brown, locked onto his, wide with hunger, fear, and something strangely theatrical, as if it expected applause for being caught. The dog froze, mouth still gripping the lid of the container it had tried to pry open. Ethan's voice sharpened in reflex. "Drop it!" What happened next made his mind briefly stall. The dog's eyes widened dramatically, its limbs stiffened, its jaw dropped open with exaggerated slowness. Then, thud. It collapsed sideways in an absurdly graceful swoon, tongue lolling, legs flopped at impossible angles. It was the most ridiculous, overacted death scene Ethan had ever witnessed. He stared at the unmoving heap of fur. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. For a moment, his grief-locked chest cracked. A faint sound rose in his throat, rusty, broken, unfamiliar. A laugh, small but real, the first in months. The dog peeked one eye open. Ethan sighed, lowered the gun, and crouched beside it. "You're not fooling anyone," he murmured, touching its flank. "Warm, alive, terrified, and starving." The dog slowly lifted its head, offering a cautious, almost hopeful look, as though asking permission to keep breathing. Ethan exhaled. Something inside him, the soldier, the widower, the man who lost too much, shifted. "All right," he grumbled, though his voice had softened. "Come on, you're not dying in a shed tonight." He stepped aside. The shepherd hesitated, then trotted after him through the snow with an odd, bouncing gait that suggested both relief and mischief. Inside the cabin's glow, Ethan shut the door against the storm. The dog shook itself violently, flinging snow everywhere, then sat proudly at his feet, as if reporting for duty. Ethan studied the creature, ragged, underfed, but carrying a spark that hadn't existed in his home for years. "Ghost," he said quietly. "Yeah, you look like a ghost." The dog's ears perked, a gentle wag of the tail, and Ethan, for the first time in years, felt the faintest ember of warmth open inside him. Fragile but real. A silent shift toward a life he didn't know he still deserved. And that was the night everything began to change. Dawn crept slowly across the snow-packed clearing, brushing faint gold against the frost that clung to the cabin windows. Inside, a thin trail of wood smoke curled toward the rafters, where decades of winters had left dark, resin-scented stains. Ethan Cole stirred awake in his armchair, his body stiff beneath a wool blanket he barely remembered pulling over himself. The first thing he felt was weight, not heavy, but warm, pressed against his boot. Ghost. The German shepherd lay curled at his feet, chest rising and falling in steady breaths, paws twitching faintly, as if chasing something in a dream. Morning light revealed details Ethan hadn't noticed the night before. The dog's coat wasn't uniformly dark, but streaked with ash gray along the back, as though a sculptor had brushed shadow across him. The bent ear gave Ghost a lopsided, almost comical expression whenever it perked, and the thinness of his frame made Ethan wonder just how long he'd been fighting the cold alone before stumbling into the shed. Ghost woke suddenly, lifting his head with that same theatrical flourish he'd used in the fake death scene. His amber eyes glowed with alertness, scanning Ethan's face like he was checking whether the man was safe to approach. Then, without hesitation, Ghost climbed onto Ethan's lap. Not gingerly, not politely. He simply planted himself across Ethan's legs, as though claiming a piece of surrendered territory. "You're not staying there," Ethan warned, though the grumble lacked heat. Ghost shifted, settling even more purposefully, tail thumping against the wooden floor. Ethan sighed, rubbing at the bridge of his nose. He could almost hear Alexei laughing. She had always been the softer one, the one who coaxed stray animals into their yard when they lived near the Navy base in Coronado. She would have adored Ghost. The thought tightened something tender inside his chest. The dog nudged Ethan's hand, sensing the shift in him. Ethan let the moment pass and pushed Ghost off, though gently. "Come on," he muttered. "You need food." The pantry still held enough supplies to get through the winter. Canned stews, dried jerky, oats, rice. Ethan opened one of the cans and poured it into a metal bowl. Ghost approached cautiously at first, but once he realized the food was his, he devoured it with such singular purpose that Ethan briefly wondered if he was feeding a starving wolf. After eating, Ghost patrolled the cabin not with fear, but with the investigative intensity of a creature deciding what parts of this new world belonged to him. He tested the couch by circling it twice before springing onto the seat cushions. Ethan shook his head. "Not happening?" Ghost tilted his head, feigning confusion, then performed a dramatic slow-motion slide off the couch, only to immediately hop onto Ethan's armchair, curl into a tight ball, and stare at him with wide, pleading eyes. "That's mine," Ethan said. Ghost blinked. Then he yawned. Ethan threw his hands up. "Fine." The rest of the day unfolded with a rhythm Ethan had not experienced in years, unpredictable, chaotic, irritating, and strangely warm. Ghost stole one of Ethan's tactical gloves and hid it beneath the firewood rack. When Ethan found him, Ghost froze mid-step, glancing back as if choosing between confession and escape. Then the dog flopped onto his side, stretched his legs out stiffly, and played dead with even more dramatic flair than the night before. "You're unbelievable," Ethan muttered, though he couldn't stop the corner of his mouth from twitching. After lunch, Ghost found his way to the small framed photograph of Alexei placed near the mantel. Ethan caught him staring up at it, ears lowered not in fear, but in curiosity, maybe even understanding. The picture showed Alexei smiling softly, her copper-brown hair braided loosely down her back, her winter coat cinched at the waist, her gray eyes warm despite the cold wind that had been blowing that day. Ethan stepped closer and rested his palm on the frame without thinking. Ghost watched him, then placed his head against Ethan's thigh. A quiet gesture, simple and earnest. It startled Ethan how natural the contact felt. Evening settled, blue and dark at the edges. Wind brushed against the walls with gentler hands than the night before. Ethan sat on the floor, leaning back against the sofa, oil lamp glowing beside him. Ghost curled up nearby, half asleep. The silence should have been comforting. Instead, it triggered old memories he had locked away. The desert. The explosion. The last moment he saw his K9 partner looking back at him before charging into the dust. Ethan felt the familiar burn rise in his throat. He clenched his jaw, breathing through it, but the pressure broke anyway. "I failed him," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of years. Ghost lifted his head. Ethan swallowed hard. "I ordered him forward. Too early. I thought the path was clear." His vision blurred. "I killed him." Ghost rose, stepping toward him with deliberate slowness. The dog pressed his forehead gently against Ethan's knee, not demanding attention, simply offering presence. A warm, steady anchor. Ethan exhaled shakily, fingers sinking into Ghost's thick fur. "You should stay away from me," he murmured. "I break the things I should protect." Ghost shifted closer, resting his chin on Ethan's thigh in quiet defiance. In the flickering lamplight, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. A small, hesitant unfreezing. The first crack in the ice around his heart. And Ghost, with his bent ear and dramatic flair, was the one who made it happen. By the time the oil lamp dimmed, Ethan knew this dog wasn't just a visitor. Ghost was a spark he never expected to see again. And the cabin no longer felt quite as cold. The storm announced itself long before it arrived, a low moan rolling through the tree line, like some ancient beast turning in its sleep. By dusk, the wind had become a serrated blade, scraping against the cabin walls as if trying to carve its way inside. Snow whirled in dense spirals that blurred sky and ground into one colorless void. Ethan Cole stood by the frosted kitchen window, arms crossed over his chest, jaw tight. Ghost lay nearby, but unlike his usual sprawled theatrics, the German shepherd sat rigidly upright, every muscle taut beneath his thickening winter coat. His amber eyes flicked toward the door, then toward the storm, then back at Ethan with a restless urgency that was impossible to ignore. Ethan tried to dismiss it. He had grown used to Ghost's quirks, stolen gloves, exaggerated fainting spells, his dramatic sighs whenever denied a scrap of jerky. But this was different. The dog paced in tight circles, nails clicking sharply on the wooden floor. His hackles rose in a ridge down his spine, and he let out a low, trembling whine. "It's just weather," Ethan muttered, though he felt the words hollow as soon as they left his mouth. Ghost pressed his forehead against the back door, breathing fast, as if something beyond that wall was calling him. Ethan put a hand on Ghost's shoulder. The dog flinched, not in fear, in urgency, the kind that bypassed training, instinct, and comfort. Ethan cracked the door just an inch. It was all the storm needed. A violent blast of white knocked the breath clean from his lungs. Wind screamed into the room, scattering papers from the table and rattling pans on their hooks. Before Ethan could curse, Ghost lunged. His powerful frame slipped through the narrow opening and vanished into the blinding white, swallowed whole by the storm. "Ghost!" Ethan snapped the door shut against the frigid roar. His pulse hammered in his throat. The cabin felt eerily empty, hollow in a way he hadn't felt since Alexei passed. The silence without Ghost's breathing was unbearable. Instinct overrode fear. Ethan bolted into the mudroom. Years of muscle memory guided him through motions he thought he'd left behind with his Navy SEAL gear. Thermal layers, fleece, heavy Gore-Tex jacket. Snow boots laced until his fingers ached. A climbing rope slung across his chest. Tactical flashlight clipped to his belt. The door slammed open and the storm swallowed him too. The cold struck like a hard fist, punching through every layer and stealing his breath. Snowflakes stung his face like shards of glass. The world shrank to a tunnel of swirling white. Ghost! The wind ripped the name from his mouth, shredding it before it traveled a yard. Ethan forced himself down the porch steps, sinking past his ankles into drifting snow. Every step was a battle. The storm disoriented him, pulling him sideways, spinning him like a leaf in a whirlpool. He tried to track landmarks, the shed, the pine stump, the old fence, line, but everything was erased under a uniform white shroud. Panic clawed up his spine. He had seen men die in storms like this. Tough men, trained men, men who panicked for just 10 seconds too long. Ghost would die out here, and so would he. Ethan pushed harder. His breath crystallized in midair. His bones felt brittle. The cold gnawed its way past his ribs, an icy hand wrapping around his lungs. His legs burned as fatigue set in, each muscle seizing with protest. The rope clipped to his belt, dragged behind him, now useless. He'd lost the sense of direction long before reaching its limit. The storm roared, drowning out rational thought. Isolation crept in like a sedative. A voice surfaced in his mind, cruel and familiar. "You're repeating it, Cole. Losing another partner. Losing another life because of you." Ethan staggered. His knees buckled. He fell face first into the snow, his cheek pressed into the frozen earth. He wanted to close his eyes, just for a moment, just long enough to rest. "Alexei, I'm sorry." Then, cutting brutally through the storm, came a single sharp bark. Ethan's eyes snapped open. Another bark, short, precise, commanding. Not panic, not fear, a signal, a call sign known only between teammates. Ghost. Ethan forced his body upright, shaking violently. He turned toward the sound. The wind clawed at him, but he leaned forward and marched into the blinding vortex. "Keep talking, buddy!" he shouted. Bark, bark, bark. Steady rhythm, steady direction. Ethan trudged, slipping, shoving through drifts that swallowed him to the thigh. His lungs burned, his vision blurred. But he followed the sound, like following the heartbeat of the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. He crested a small slope and slid down the other side, knees buckling. The barking grew louder. He wasn't imagining it. Ghost was calling him, not as an owner, not as a rescuer, but as a partner in a mission neither of them fully understood yet. Ethan gritted his teeth. "I'm coming, Ghost," he growled through chattering teeth. "I'm not losing you." That vow carried him forward, into the deepest part of the storm, where Ghost waited with something that would change everything. The storm seemed to thicken as Ethan pushed deeper into the ravine, its winds twisting like a living creature trying to drag him back. His boots slipped on the uneven ground, catching on roots hidden beneath the snow. The beam of his flashlight trembled in his hand, casting frantic arcs of pale light that were swallowed almost instantly by the swirling white. But Ghost's barking, short, urgent, rhythmic, pulled him on with the precision of a rescue signal drilled into the soul of a soldier. When the slope suddenly leveled out, Ethan nearly pitched forward. The barking was close now, muffled only slightly by the roar of the storm. He swept the flashlight beam ahead. A dark shape hunched against a jagged outcrop of stone. "Ghost!" Ethan stumbled toward it, half running, half falling. Ghost turned his head. His normally bright amber eyes were dulled by exhaustion, his thick coat crusted with ice. The dog trembled, legs braced wide as he curled protectively around a small shape at his belly. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him. "What do you have there, boy?" His voice cracked in the frozen air. The dog shifted just enough for Ethan to see it. A tiny shepherd pup, its body half buried in a torn cardboard box that had been ripped open by the wind. The pup couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 weeks old. Its fur was matted with frost, sticking up in stiff needles. One ear stood upright while the other drooped over its face like a leaf too heavy for its stem. Its breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. Ghost let out a low whine and nudged the pup's flank with his nose, licking gently at its icy fur. Ethan's gut twisted. Some heartless driver must have tossed the box from the road above the ravine. The pup must have crawled out, crying until Ghost heard it through the storm. "You stubborn hero," Ethan murmured to Ghost, running a gloved hand down the dog's back. "You would freeze yourself before letting this little thing die." He stripped off his outer gloves with his teeth, letting the cold bite into his skin in sharp needles. Then he scooped the pup up, pressing its tiny frozen frame against his thermal layers. The pup was shockingly light, more like a handful of frost than a living creature. Ethan shoved it inside his jacket, sealing the zipper around it, so that his own body heat enveloped the fragile life. "We're going home," he rasped. "Both of you stay with me." Ghost rose shakily, pressing his body against Ethan's leg as if bracing him for the climb. Together they pushed forward, fighting gravity and the punishing wind. Ethan's muscles screamed as he hauled Ghost up the steep incline when the dog faltered, and Ghost leaned against him whenever his knees buckled. They were no longer man and dog. They were survivors locked in the same battle. The trek back felt endless. Several times Ethan's vision blurred, and he nearly stumbled into the drifts to rest. Just a moment, he told himself, lying to his own instincts. But every time he slowed, he felt a faint movement beneath his jacket. The pup shifting, breathing, fighting. That tiny reminder kept him moving. Ghost, limping slightly now, kept pace with fierce determination. When the cabin's outline finally broke through the storm's veil, Ethan let out a hoarse sound, half laugh, half sob. He kicked the door open with his last ounce of strength and collapsed inside, the warmth of the cabin hitting him like a wave. He laid Ghost near the hearth, then unzipped his jacket. The pup lay limp in his hands, its fur dripping melted snow onto the rug. Ethan grabbed the thick wool blanket Alexi had knitted years ago, a blanket he hadn't touched since her passing, and wrapped the pup in it. He rubbed its limbs, firm but gentle, trying to coax warmth back into its tiny veins. Ghost crawled closer, laying his head beside the bundle and licking its ears with slow, deliberate strokes. Minutes passed. Then the pup twitched. Its tiny chest expanded with a sharper inhale. Its eyes fluttered open, pale hazel, unfocused but alive. A small squeak escaped its throat. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a place he had believed frozen beyond repair. "Well," he whispered, his voice cracking with relief, "you're a stubborn little sprout, aren't you?" The name settled instantly. Strong, small, alive against impossible odds. Sprout nuzzled weakly against Ghost's paw. Ghost responded by placing his chin over the pup, the gesture protective yet tender. That night, the cabin held 3 steady heartbeats, one worn by grief, one hardened by survival, and one beginning its first fragile rhythm. The fire crackled warmly, casting their shadows against the log walls like a family newly forged in the harshest winter. Ethan sat watching them, the storm howling outside. But inside, for the first time in years, something soft began to thaw within him. The storm finally loosened its grip on the mountains, leaving behind a world glazed in white glass. The next morning arrived with a reluctant sun, its watery light dripping through the cabin windows and settling on the wool rug where Sprout slept, curled against Ghost's flank. Ethan Cole stood by the hearth, mug in hand, studying them with an expression that hovered between disbelief and quiet awe. Ghost looked different this morning. Not in body, his frame was still lean, his fur a rugged mix of sable and black, but in presence. There was a gravity in his brown eyes, a depth that made Ethan feel as though the dog was carrying a weight older than the storm itself. Sprout, meanwhile, was a trembling ball of fluff, his oversized paws twitching as if he were dreaming of running across a field he had never seen. One ear stood upright, the other drooped comically, unable to commit to either side. He looked fragile, yes, but determined, too. A survivor. Ethan set down his mug and knelt beside them. "You two nearly killed me out there," he murmured, the words gruff but softened by the warmth in his eyes. Ghost lifted his head and nudged Ethan's wrist, a gesture that seemed to say, "You came because you had to." Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the pines and long shadows stretched across the snow, Ethan fetched a towel to dry Ghost's neck fur more thoroughly. The storm had soaked deep into the leather collar Ghost wore, a battered honey-brown strap with a brass buckle dulled by years of use. Ethan had seen it many times, but had never inspected it closely. As he rubbed the inside of the collar, his fingers caught on something, a ridge beneath the leather. Frowning, He held it to the light. The bead-sized lump was sewn under a clumsily stitched flap, the thread thin and uneven, like the work of hands that shook with age. "What did your old man stash in here?" Ethan muttered. He took out his pocket knife, the same one he had carried through deployments overseas, a simple steel blade with a worn grip, etched with scratches from both war and wilderness. He sliced the thread carefully. The leather peeled back to reveal a small cylinder of brushed aluminum, barely the length of his thumb. Ethan turned it over in his palm. It was military grade, sealed tight, watertight, built to endure. "Someone loved you," he whispered. Inside the cabin, he sat at the desk beneath the window and clicked open the capsule. A micro SD card slid into his palm. His chest tightened. Memories of tactical briefings, top-secret packages, encrypted data flashed through his mind. But something about the homemade stitching, the aged leather, told him this was something more human than classified intelligence. He inserted the card into the laptop. A folder appeared, for whoever finds him. Ethan clicked the first file. The screen flickered, revealing the living room of a modest old house. Stacks of books lined the walls. Sunlight streamed through thin curtains. And in the center sat an elderly man with a weathered face and wisps of white hair. His eyes, blue but clouded, carried the fragile brightness of someone drifting in and out of reality. Howard Whitlock, Ethan realized. Howard had been mentioned by a neighbor once, a quiet veteran who rarely spoke but always walked with a dog at his side. In the video, Howard sat holding the camera awkwardly. His lined face trembled, his fingers twitching with the telltale signs of dementia. Next to him lay a younger ghost, sleek, sharp-eyed, resting his chin on Howard's knee. Is it recording?" Howard asked, squinting. A soft voice from behind the camera assured him it was. Howard nodded. "Good, because I want to say this while I still remember." He stroked Ghost's head. The dog nudged him gently, as if grounding him. "This boy, my Ghost, he saves me. When I forget where I am, he limps, so I'll worry about him instead of panicking." In the video, Ghost exaggerated a limp, dragging his paw until Howard burst into warm laughter. Ethan felt a stab in his chest. Howard's voice softened. "When I freeze during an episode, he plays dead. Makes me think he needs help. Always gives me a mission. Soldiers like us, we need a mission." A single tear slid down Howard's cheek. "If you found him, if he ran like I told him to, please don't let him wander without purpose." His breath hitched. "Give him a new squad, a new life. Don't let him be alone." The video ended abruptly. Ethan stared at the black screen, throat tight. Then he turned. Ghost sat behind him, silent, watching, not performing, just waiting. Ethan sank to the floor and wrapped his arms around Ghost's neck. His voice cracked. "You weren't just goofing around. You were trying to fix me." Ghost pressed his head into Ethan's shoulder, warm and steady. Sprout toddled over, plopping himself onto Ethan's lap with all the coordination of a newborn deer. Ethan let out a shaky laugh. That night, Ethan walked out to the front gate. With a chisel and hammer, he mounted a wood-carved sign he had crafted from an old cedar plank. The letters burned deep into the grain, read, "Ethan's Outpost. Never leave a brother behind." When he stepped back, Ghost sat on his right, Sprout on his left, both looking up as if inspecting their new headquarters. Ethan reached down. 2 paws and 1 scarred hand met in the cold air, a pact of 3 soldiers bound by survival, loyalty, and love. And as the last snow of winter melted from the eaves, Ethan understood. His mission wasn't finished at all. It had only just begun. Even in the harshest winters of our lives, when grief feels endless and the nights grow unbearably long, God often sends us small miracles disguised in fur, in loyalty, in unexpected companionship. Ghost and Sprout were not accidents. They were reminders that grace can arrive quietly, slipping through the cracks of our brokenness until warmth returns to places we thought forever frozen. And just like Ethan, each of us carries battles the world cannot see. Yet healing may come from the simplest acts of love we allow into our homes and hearts. If this story touched you, or reminded you that hope still exists in the ordinary days, please share it with someone who needs light. Leave a comment about the guardian angels in your own life, and subscribe to join us for more stories of faith, resilience, and compassion. May God bless you and protect your home with peace.